How could a man draped in holiness turn out to be the darkest fraud of all? He stood at the altar with fire in his voice, shouting in the name of God, declaring miracles before thousands who believed every word. Crowds wept as wheelchairs were lifted, cameras flashed as headlines called him a healer, and millions poured in their savings to touch what they thought was divine. He drove Lamborghinis through city streets, his Rolls-Royce Cullinan gleaming like a crown of gold, his McLaren parked outside churches where families struggling to pay rent still gave their last dollar to keep his empire alive. They saw a savior, but in reality, they were staring at a man who mocked the very faith he preached. And the truth? It all came crashing down when one woman finally said, "Enough." Tonight, we pull back the robe and reveal the hidden truth no one saw coming. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. But this is where the story of Elijah Carter takes its sharpest turn, because the questions that followed his downfall shook every soul who had ever trusted him. Was Elijah truly a man chosen by God, or was he a master of deception who studied weakness and turned faith into his stage? How did a single preacher rise from a tiny storefront church to commanding arenas filled with tens of thousands, building an empire of wealth, power, and influence that rivaled politicians and celebrities? Was it charisma? Was it divine favor? Or was it a carefully woven illusion? And then came the discovery that would send chills across the nation. Inside his mansion, hidden behind locked doors, investigators uncovered a secret room that no one outside his closest circle had ever seen. What was stored there, and why was it kept from the public eye? These questions are the threads of a tale that will unravel the mask of Elijah Carter piece by piece. And by the end of this journey, you may find yourself questioning not only him, but the very meaning of trust, faith, and power in a world where appearance is everything. Elijah Carter was not born into power. His beginnings were humble, even forgettable. But he carried something most men did not: a voice that could move a crowd, and eyes that convinced you he saw your pain. On street corners in forgotten neighborhoods, Elijah would stand with nothing more than a second-hand Bible, calling strangers to gather as if he had been anointed. People came because he promised hope, and for some, that was all they had left. He laid hands on the desperate, whispered prayers over the broken, and when a man limped forward and suddenly claimed he could walk, the crowd gasped. Whether it was real or not, Elijah understood in that instant that nothing spread faster than belief. Word of miracles began to travel across towns. Soon his small gatherings became tent revivals, filled with mothers clutching children, fathers praying for jobs, and the sick pleading for healing. Every shout of joy, every tearful testimony built the legend of Elijah Carter. But as his following grew, so did his appetite. By the time news cameras arrived, Elijah was no longer the street preacher with worn shoes. He was the man commanding packed arenas where tens of thousands raised their hands in unison, swaying to his every word. Television broadcasts amplified his reach, turning his name into a household brand of hope and deliverance. Donations poured in faster than prayers, and with each passing year, Elijah Carter's empire expanded beyond the pulpit. Yet behind the smiles, the testimonies, and the roaring applause, something else was growing too: his hunger for wealth, his craving for adoration, and his taste for the kind of luxury no ordinary man of faith would ever dare to display. In his rise, the seeds of his downfall had already been planted, waiting for the moment they would reveal what truly fueled his miracles. By the height of his fame, Elijah Carter was no longer just a pastor. He was a phenomenon. Headlines called him the miracle worker of America, the man who healed what medicine could not and turned skeptics into believers. His sermons filled arenas, his broadcast programs drew millions, and his followers saw him as proof that God still walked among men. But alongside the worship came the showmanship. Elijah's garage told a story far different from his sermons: a gleaming McLaren, a Rolls-Royce Cullinan, a Lamborghini that roared louder than any choir. His churches became cash machines, with offerings flowing in from the poorest of families desperate for a touch of his hand. Yet behind the glamour of luxury cars and private jets, Elijah Carter was slipping deeper into appetites that had nothing to do with faith. The man who preached sacrifice to his flock lived a life of excess, and in that excess, temptation would find its way through. Her name was Vanessa. To his congregation, she was simply an elegant young woman, strikingly beautiful but humble in spirit. To Elijah, she became an obsession. What began as casual attention turned into persistent pursuit, an inappropriate hand on the shoulder, words whispered too close, invitations that blurred the line between spiritual counsel and predatory intent. Vanessa resisted, but Elijah's hunger only grew bolder, until finally she did what no one else dared. She took him to court. Her lawsuit for harassment shook the image he had so carefully built. And then came the revelation. Because what Vanessa revealed in those hearings would ignite a storm that no one, not even Elijah Carter, could control. The moment Vanessa's lawsuit became public, the story of Elijah Carter began to unravel faster than anyone could have imagined. Newspapers printed her claims on their front pages, television anchors replayed her testimony on nightly broadcasts, and the nation watched as the once revered miracle worker of America was now painted as a predator. His followers were split, some in denial, others shaken by the idea that the man who claimed to speak for God might have been using that very claim to prey on the vulnerable. Then came the voices that had long been silenced. One by one, more women stepped forward, their stories echoing the same patterns of manipulation and abuse, their courage exposing what had once been hidden beneath the robe of a preacher who stood untouchable before his congregation. Public shock turned into outrage. How could Elijah Carter, the man they praised as anointed, be accused of such betrayal? As pressure mounted, law enforcement could no longer ignore the storm. A raid was ordered on Elijah Carter's mansion, a sprawling estate that had been admired by his followers as a symbol of divine blessing. But what the police discovered inside its walls told a story far more troubling. Past the marble halls and gilded rooms, officers came upon a locked door that none of his staff admitted knowing about. Behind it, they found a hidden chamber, one that looked nothing like the sanctuaries he built for his flock. Here were artifacts not of faith, but of rituals, symbols etched on walls, and strange objects that investigators would later describe as deeply unsettling. Piles of cash were stacked in boxes, expensive watches and jewelry were scattered across shelves, and documents hinted at a network of schemes that kept his empire alive. The media seized on every leaked detail. Headlines screamed across the nation. Pastors' miracles a hoax? Congregations that once filled stadiums with praise now sat in disbelief, their faith shaken, their trust shattered. Elijah Carter's empire of miracles was exposed piece by piece, not as a testament of divine power but as a carefully engineered performance of deceit. Yet, as damning as the evidence seemed, investigators hinted that the most disturbing discoveries were still to come. The cash, the artifacts, the luxury items. They were shocking enough, but buried within that hidden room was something so horrifying, so unexpected, that even seasoned detectives admitted they had never seen anything like it. And it was this revelation that would redefine Elijah Carter's legacy forever. When the case against Elijah Carter reached the courtroom, the truth began to unfold with devastating clarity. Court records revealed that the miracles millions had believed in were carefully staged productions, crafted to impress the faithful while filling his pockets with their offerings. Evidence showed how dark rituals were carried out in secrecy, how Carter relied on placebo setups and hidden tricks to create the illusion of supernatural power. Former staff members, once loyal to him, now testified under oath that they had been ordered to find actors willing to fake illnesses, to collapse dramatically during sermons, and to rise as though healed at his command. They spoke of earpieces that fed Carter information about desperate congregants, details gathered from prayer cards and whispered confessions, all used to make him appear prophetic. Layer by layer, the illusion was torn apart until what remained was not a man of God, but a performer who built his empire on manipulation. The most heartbreaking revelations came not from his staff, but from the victims themselves. Women who had once believed they were safe under Elijah Carter's leadership stood before the court, their voices trembling as they described the abuse, the harassment, and the betrayal that scarred their lives forever. Their pain was raw, their stories undeniable, and together they painted the picture of a man who had used the sacred trust of faith as a weapon. What had been presented to the world as a ministry of healing was exposed as a multi-million-dollar fraud that stretched across cities and continents. By the time the testimonies were complete, the image of Elijah Carter in his flowing robe had been shattered. That robe, once a symbol of holiness, was now seen for what it truly was, nothing more than a costume hiding a predator. At last, the day of judgment came. Elijah Carter, once paraded as the miracle worker of America, stood before the court, stripped of his robe, stripped of his power, stripped of the image he had spent decades building. The verdict was clear and merciless. Guilty of fraud, guilty of serial assault, guilty of abuse of power. In one ruling, the empire he built on the backs of the faithful collapsed into ruins. His fortune was seized, his estates auctioned off, his luxury cars towed away as evidence of ill-gotten gains. The man who once commanded stadiums of worshippers was now reduced to a number in the prison system, his sentence delivered with finality. Where once he walked with adoring crowds at his side, Elijah Carter now walked alone, shackled, facing years behind bars with nothing left but the echo of the lies he once told. But the true weight of Elijah Carter's downfall was not measured in dollars or prison years. It was measured in the trust he destroyed. Families who once believed in him now carried scars deeper than wounds. Faith that once lifted them now left them questioning everything. And it leads us to an unsettling truth. The greatest betrayal isn't the theft of money or the abuse of power. It is the theft of trust, the kind that cuts into the soul and leaves marks that never heal. And here's the haunting part. If we couldn't see through Elijah Carter, if thousands were deceived by the glow of his robe and the sound of his voice, how many more robes out there are hiding the same truth, waiting to be uncovered? If you were part of Elijah Carter's congregation, standing in those crowds watching what you thought were miracles unfold before your very eyes, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven him, believing that even a fallen man can repent? Or would you have turned your back forever, refusing to give trust to someone who abused it so completely? These are not easy questions, but they are the ones that linger long after the headlines fade. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your perspective matters in uncovering the lessons behind stories like these. And if Elijah Carter's story left you stunned, hold on, because the next story is one you will not want to miss. Imagine a funeral where the mourners wept in silence, only for one secret guest to walk in and bring everything crashing down. That's what awaits you in our next video. Subscribe now, because you won't want to miss the hidden truths and shocking twists we're about to reveal.